One Head is Good Enough by Bozeman. Pros: good ammo, a little supplies, some numbers. Cons: no idea what this is for, where we are. In other words, things are going well. Crank was writing on the inside of a box of ammunition with a pen he had found randomly. Bonzo said, "What are you writing?" "My diary." Bonzo didn't follow up. Location isn't bad. Other group wasn't hostile after the limo ride. We'll look at breaking out tonight. Fence is about 12 feet, barbed wire. Not really prisoners. Not sure what we are. Makes last week seem like a field trip. Crank stuffed the cardboard between a couple of bricks and put the pen in his breast pocket behind his Kevlar vest. He'd always kept a diary. His father forced him to. Before bed, he had to write down one sentence about the day. His dad said it kept you centered, that it gave continuity to your life. That wasn't bad advice, because his dad was in the Army and they moved 50,000 times before he was 18 and he, surprise, surprise, joined the Army. There won't seem to be any point to it on any given day, his dad said, but after years, you'll see a straight line in your life somewhere. You'll be surprised when you find it. He was right. Crank had volumes of stuff written down, and though his life was still a winding road, he was surprised to feel like he had a straight line going to people like Ben Franklin and other journal writers. Apparently, that was the difference in how the fox runs and the crow flies. The diary was gone now, but when he could, he'd write down at least one sentence and then leave it wherever he was. There was no point trying to save anything, ever. He made an exception for the pen, but didn't expect to have it after the next little crisis. A few weeks back, everything was so chaotic that both sides thought his group was on their side. That was a stroke of luck that let them squeeze out of that situation. His new rule number 1 was that you never make allies. Just avoid everyone until you can tell what's going on. And for months now, no one had had any idea what was going on. Years, really. No one even knew who the sides were. It used to be the Patriots and the True Patriots, or something like that. Crank was pretty sure he had been a patriot. There were also the Radicals, but they were small. In a way, they weren't a party or a militia like the others. They were a lot of little factions, and everyone was claiming to be a radical after a while. The days when people were Democrats and Republicans seemed quaint and old-fashioned. In fact, they were already pretty much gone when the real fighting started. And things only got more busted up after that. Between small arms, heavy-duty arms, EMPs, possibly a couple of tactical nukes, you had no communication, no leadership, no supplies, no orders, nothing. Pretty soon, you really just went by whatever group you were in. And the names got strange for a while, and then less and less inventive over time. He was part of the Lobstermen, then the Undertakers, then the Berserkers, and a couple others, possibly in that order. But before long, the groups were just called by their leader. Crank's last group was McGrath's boys, and there were still 2 others of them left, although McGrath wasn't one of them. Bonzo was the last of Randall's group. It reminded him of one of those animations where the camera keeps zooming in on a small piece of the picture. But that becomes a new world, and then it keeps zooming in on another small detail, which becomes another world. Everything was more minute, but seemed just as important the whole way down. Everyone's real name was long gone. That started with using code names online, and by now everyone had been through a lot of different names. Crank was only his latest. Others were Fatboy, Shambles, Crackpot, whatever came to mind. He tried to have something memorable, because if somebody needs your attention in a firefight, they can't be trying to remember if your name is Jeff or James or John Jacob Jingleheimer. A week before, he and the rest of McGrath's boys had been licking their wounds after an ambush. It was a really lame attack, actually, very easy to sniff out. It was dusk in a thick woods where they were trying to find a place to camp. There was an obvious set of tracks where some people had gone into the bushes, so they knew something was up. Sure enough, not 50 yards later, someone vocalized in the woods, and Crank silenced the person with a 3-round burst. The rest panicked and ran, after which they went in and dispatched them all with knives. They found a good amount of food and ammo, so why those guys had set up an ambush at all was a mystery. So was the fact that any group that stupid could have survived so long. Crank figured they must have just joined up, which always spells trouble, and why McGrath's rule number 1 was not to let in new members. But then they came under real fire from something entirely different, and that time, it didn't go so well. It wasn't an ambush. They were just flat out outnumbered. They were creeping alongside a road in the woods, because you never walk straight down the middle of a street, and sighted a barricade. They turned around, but by that time they were flanked, and then another detachment came up from the rear. All they had for cover was the road shoulder, and that obviously made no difference for the ones coming at them from that side. They wiped out the other 9 people, 7 guys and 2 girls, but took mercy on Crank, Riptide, and Fembot. Fembot was not a girl. He just went by the same naming convention as Crank, anonymous but memorable. They got jammed into a van and taken to some kind of camp. They were left in the van in the baking sun for a couple hours to demoralize them. Then they shoved in a few others. They drove them a good ways off, then opened the back doors and told them to get out. The van took off and they saw about 80 yards away a pile of their guns, ammo, and other equipment. There was a sign on it that said, "Get ready and go to the town. Don't shoot anyone until you have instructions. If you or anyone else does, we'll napalm this entire area. Anyone we don't get, we'll hang, draw, and quarter." "What's that?" said Riptide. Crank said, "They hang you till you're almost dead. Then they cut you open and pull your guts out and burn them. Then they tie ropes to your arms and legs and pull you to pieces with horses. I guess they'll use cars, but it's as much an art as it is a science. Sometimes they spice things up by dragging you through the street or involving certain other organs." Riptide swallowed. Crank continued, "I heard about another group a long while back that did this, but they didn't know what drawing meant, so the noise of a helicopter burst over them. Crank had experienced that before. Sometimes wind, heat, and topography will disguise the sound until the last second. But the others hadn't, and they dove. The helicopter, which circled back and hovered about 100 yards away, gave a short burst of gunfire which crashed into the ground and created several bursts of dirt. "That's an Apache," said Crank. "It's a chain gun. I'd say we best get into town." They followed the road and found themselves in a burned-out town, mostly rubble. The Apache circled around, and soon they saw a couple of other helos doing the same thing. Those ones were just regular helicopters, though, and there were just people with machine guns on them. Crank saw a pretty good location, but he said, "We'll go for the 3rd best place we can find. Whoever anyone else is from that sign probably has the best places already." They found a crater behind a standing wall. "No one talks," said Crank. The helicopters kept circling, but they went away after the sun went down. Everyone else had followed Crank's order and stayed quiet, so Crank figured that he had the conch. "There haven't been any instructions, so after dark we move. Everyone else here knows exactly where we are. You can talk now, just make it a whisper." No one talked. "Are you the same group?" he said. Bonzo finally answered. "I was with Randall's group." "I know them," said Crank. "F you for 2 weeks ago." "Cool," said Bonzo. "F you too." The others wouldn't talk. "Follow me," said Crank. Which they did, which is what brought them to the bay of an old Jiffy Lube. The bay door wasn't ideal, but the office had small windows and bulletproof glass where the payment window was. The area just outside had been fortified by some previous occupants. That space where the mechanic goes under the car would make a good redoubt, although Crank wouldn't want to be there when a grenade got thrown in. And that's how they got where they were, with Crank writing in his diary. Thankfully, the water was working because their dehydration was getting worrisome. Crank had seen a water tower in the distance, beyond a line of barbed wire fence, and apparently it had not gotten messed up in whatever mini-war had happened there. What the quality of the water was, they didn't know, but there was no choice. Food would have been nice too, but they were all used to getting food when it was available and shutting up about it when it wasn't. Squeaky wheels got pried off and thrown away. There were two others that had gotten jammed in with them in the van, a man and a woman. They were by the windows, and the woman was watching out while the man slept. Crank went over to her and looked her in the eye with purpose. Okay, so first of all, why are you two silent? The woman scanned the room. Bonzo was looking at her. We got messed up by Randall's group the other day. She glared at Bonzo as she said that, though she whispered too low to be heard by him. Okay, and I don't give a shit. That takes care of that. What do you know about where we are? This is because of that freak Vlad Dracul. Never heard of him. He walks around dressed up in a black cape and thinks he's some kind of anti-hero out of Mad Max. But he has an Apache helicopter. More than one. This is a small army we're talking about. Maybe 200 guys. I don't know where the hardware came from, but he's real medieval. If you count the hookers, the slaves, and some really disturbing-looking children, it's maybe 500. What's up with these instructions? I don't know, but it'll be something out of a movie. He thinks he's some kind of creative genius, but he's really just a little goth weasel. You know him, don't you? He was the little goth weasel piece of dog shit in my high school. I always thought he would be the next school shooter. Looks to me like he's found his place in the world. Why are people following him? I don't know. Why are we following you? Because there's no one else. Could be anything. The man stirred. Meet my boyfriend, Rat Poison. Crank glanced at him. What's his next move? And tell me your name. Oakley. That's because I have a good shot. His next move is to... Just then a tornado siren started blaring. Then there was a voice. All residents, Vlad Dracul offers peace. He desires the best of you to join his group. Oakley said, That's Vlad talking. Total narcissist. And he thinks it's funny to call us residents. The announcement continued. In 5 minutes, helicopters will fly over with bags that will be dropped around the area. There is one bag for each person and one only. Do not fire on anyone attempting to get a bag. It contains an object and a message. Read it carefully. If anyone shoots at the helicopters, the entire area will be napalmed. Any survivors will be eaten by dogs. At least that's an improvement on hang, draw, and quarter, said Riptide. Over the loudspeaker came a voice, begging and pleading for mercy. Then there was the sound of barking dogs and screaming for 2 or 3 minutes. Riptide swallowed and looked at Crank, who said, You sure that's an improvement? Vlad repeated his message, and then there was silence. Oakley said, It's going to be some kind of social experiment. Just you watch. Damn, I wish the bullies had done their job when they had the chance. 2 helicopters went around dropping brown cloth bags, spaced out around 20 or more yards apart from each other. Then they went away, and 2 Apaches came in to take their place. After a minute or so, someone ran out to get a bag, and then went back to his place. Then another, and another did the same. A burst of machine gun fire brought one of them down, and just as quickly, a missile came down from one of the Apaches to blow up the place where the bullet had come from. Idiot, said Crank. They can retrace your bullets automatically. That's been around for years. Kind of a waste of a Hellfire missile, said Fembot. Apparently, there were a few others who didn't know because a couple of other missiles went down too in other parts of the town. Then they saw someone picking up 2 bags. He didn't make it more than 10 steps before an Apache man gunned him down. He did it with the main gun, which seemed excessive to Crank. All right, I'm ready, said Crank. He walked out into the street slowly and easily as a British officer in World War I, casually picking up a bag and returned to the Jiffy Lube. He opened up the bag. Inside was some kind of saw. "Oh, that's a bone saw," said Riptide. "That's for amputations." There was a folded piece of paper that Crank opened and read aloud. "Each person who comes to the north gate with a severed head will be allowed out of the area and accepted into our group." "See?" said Oakley. "All right, Oakley," said Crank. He looked around at the others. "I suggest the rest of you get going while they're still on sale." The rest of them cautiously went for the bags. Oakley and Rat Poison running, Riptide crouching, and only Fembot walking the same way Crank had. The first one back was Bonzo, who saw Crank in Mechanic's Well pointing his machine gun at him. "I'm not going to shoot, Bonzo," he said, "but we all have to talk. Now get in here with me, because we'll need more than one gun to keep everyone else in line." Bonzo did as he was told. As the others came in, Crank told them to line up because he had a plan. Rat Poison was the last one back. "Okay," said Crank, "we're all thinking the same thing. Who in here would cut my head off?" Answer, all of us. "But we'd be much better off if we take down some others one by one and get their heads." Oakley said, "It's awful quick of you to just give in to this." Crank thought she had a point. Back in the day, he would have tried to organize them all and get the others to rebel against Vlad Dracul and his stupid fantasy. They would have pledged allegiance and sworn not to give in, to go down fighting. They would have put their hands in the middle and shouted as they threw them up in the air, yelled, "Wolverines," and charged out against the enemy in a do-or-die attack. But he had been through enough of those suicide missions. Maybe it was the smart ones who survived, or maybe the cowards. Either way, soldiers these days just did what they needed to survive. A few ideologues or diehards or psychos became leaders, and most of them got cycled through before long. Today we're getting out alive. I don't have any love for you, nor you for me. But we've known each other a little longer than we have anyone else here. And don't talk, Oakley. Knowing Vlad Dracul in high school doesn't count. When he said count, she started laughing, and so did the rest. Finally, Crank cracked a smile too. He climbed out of the well, followed by Bonzo. "I don't know what the hell is going to happen, but let's just stick together. The north gate can't be more than half a mile. The way I figure it, a lot of people are going to wait until the others take some heads. Then they'll go to take those heads. So let's give it a few minutes and focus fire on the opportunists. That will be 2 heads with 1 stone. And don't forget the bags. I think they're for carrying the heads. See, Oakley? Vlad isn't so inconsiderate after all." They went back to their windows and watched. The area was quiet. A few bags still sat out there. He was able to take in the feeling of disbelief over this situation. All of a sudden, he's in a bizarre, psychopathic snuff flick some freak from high school probably dreamed up while he was high. Bonzo said, "How long do we have?" The loudspeaker came to life with the answer. 45 minutes. 45 minutes. 45 minutes. "What?" said Riptide. "He never said anything about a time limit." Someone ran out to get his bag. Another came out to get another one. As the first was running back, the second one tackled him. He practically got him in a headlock, but the first guy wriggled free. What followed was a fight to the death, conducted right out in the arena of the dirt next to the road. It went on and on. The exhaustion was apparent, and finally the first guy got the other one pinned and strangled him. When he stopped struggling, he wasted no time in sawing off the head and putting it in his bag. He sprinted off toward the north. But then someone else came out and attacked. The first guy was too tired to fight and was strangled. The third guy stole his head and ran on. 2 sayings occurred to Crank in the flash of a second. 1, the early bird gets the worm. And 2, the first rat gets caught and the second gets the cheese. "Now," said Crank. They fired at him and brought him down. "Don't go," he said. "I'm not sure if that was breaking the rules." They waited. There were 3 dead men out there, one whose head was already cut off. That would take care of half the group. 30 minutes. 30 minutes. 30 minutes. 3 other people ran out toward the dead men. Meanwhile, scattered gunfire could be heard throughout the city. "Shoot," said Crank. That very second, a hail of fire came from across the street. Fembot went down immediately. Crank cursed himself. Of course! They had already given away their position, and that other group had friends ready to take them out as soon as the 3 running out drew their fire. How could I be so stupid, thought Crank. Rule number 1. If you give away your position, move. They shot back, but not before Riptide got one in the chest. He was gasping for breath, but obviously wasn't going to make it. They fired back and forth for a few minutes before the other side stopped. McGrath's boys down to one boy now, thought Crank. McGrath boys are down to 1 boy now, thought Crank. All right, we need these 2 heads. Then we'll go after those other bastards. Bonzo, you take that one, he said, pointing to Riptide, who had fallen a good 20 yards away. Crank went over to Fembot. Sorry, buddy. Been nice knowing you, but there's no other way. He sawed through his neck, steeling himself against the dead eyes of his erstwhile comrade, and put the head in the bag. Yo, Crank, said Bonzo. I can't do this. He's alive. Let me see, said Crank. He walked over and put a bullet through Riptide's head. Doesn't look like it to me. Crank saw a flash of anger in Bonzo's eyes, but nothing more. Outrage would have taken place 3 years ago, not now. Bonzo went to work with the saw. Damn it, said Crank. Oakley and Rat Poison were gone. He did a quick scan to make sure they weren't pointing guns at him. All right, Bonzo, it's just you and me now. Bonzo said, slow down, this is the first date. Crank peered out the window. Across the street, he saw a hand waving from behind a low wall. It was a woman's hand. Crank, it's me, Oakley. She was trying to keep her voice just loud enough to be heard by him. What the hell are you doing over there? We got one of these bastards. I got his head. No more dumb mistakes, Crank thought. Hold it up. I can't. Somebody might see. 15 minutes. 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Crank gave her the okay signal. He turned to Bonzo. Let's get out the other side and head north. Wait, look, said Bonzo. A guy was running toward Oakley. 3 shots ran out from a window near where she was, and the guy went down, falling almost on top of her position. Rat Poison jumped out and dragged him behind the wall. What a bitch, said Crank. I knew it. They went out the other window and started running. There was no time for tactical maneuvering. Apparently, they weren't the only ones who noticed, because people started coming out from everywhere with or without heads. Suddenly, desperate battles occurred. Crank could see that the skirmishes were so chaotic that sometimes only 1 out of 4 or 5 would survive. If only we could have gotten organized, he thought. We could have kept the death toll to 50%. Now it'll be more like 80%. They heard what sounded like a sustained firefight, but they couldn't tell where the shots were coming from. Crank darted his eyes back and forth every which way. Those first-person shooter games had a purpose after all, he thought. 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes. An RPG blasted a hole in the wall across from where he was. An organized group rushed through the hole. A barrage of gunfire opened up around Crank and Bonzo, and they dove for cover anywhere, which in Crank's case was behind a cement-potted plant. The group immediately took hits. Organized or not, they couldn't deal with shooters all over the clock. When they went down, a herd of people descended on them like zombies. Most of the group had heads tied to their waistbands, and those were stripped away. A few other people started sawing at them. It was a good chance for him and Bonzo to run. They sprinted, and he saw a gate up ahead. 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. Another group came around the corner. Crank could see that they all had heads. They stopped and raised their weapons at him. Cease fire, he yelled. Don't shoot. We can make it if we cease fire. Somehow they saw reason and ran the same direction. They and the others were only about 150 yards from the gate. They could see dozens of guards waiting for them. Someone fired at them from the right. The group turned as one and blasted at it. The shots were coming from behind a corner. The storm of gunfire took pieces off the corner, and the person behind it grabbed her eyes and stumbled into the open. It was Oakley, and she had a head stuffed into her jacket, not in its brown bag. Crank ran up to her. "Why were you shooting at us?" he screamed. "You have a head." She doubled over in pain, and the head dropped to the ground. It was rat poisons. Crank raised his gun and blasted her, then turned and ran. The north gate lay just a few tens of yards ahead. The soldiers were taking people in, one at a time, through a turning gate. The ones on the outside were pressing the others from behind. "Don't push," the guards were yelling. The guards shot someone who wouldn't listen, and the rest backed off. 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute. It was an amazing test of patience to wait as people went in one by one. About 10 more to go. A sudden barrage of gunfire came from behind. One person who had no head was charging the gate. Crank couldn't believe it because, from where he was standing, he could see several heads in the roadway left over from earlier fights. Everyone who was still waiting turned and fired back, and he fell like a sack of potatoes. Finally, Crank got through the gate, threw his gun into a large container, and turned over his macabre passport, which was hurled into a pile next to the guns. He couldn't see Bonzo anywhere. He looked at the pile of heads and didn't see him there either. The sirens started blaring again, and the helicopters opened fire on the town. They were led to a warehouse and shoved in. "Crank!" It was Bonzo, who jogged over and shook his hand like he was meeting an old friend. Crank said, "What happened to you?" "No, what happened to you? You were right next to me. Then you were gone." "I had to do an errand. I'll tell you later." They found a place by the wall and looked at the scene. There were about 75 people in there. Everyone was keeping his distance except for a few small groupings like Crank and Bonzo. A lot of people were injured, but there were tables with bandages and other first aid set up. No one was there to supervise, but as yet there were no fights. Crank would have expected fights because with that many people there would be a fair share of betrayals and treason to go around. Perhaps people hadn't had enough time to get angry. Crank and Bonzo weren't far from a corner of the warehouse, so he decided to do something other than just sit there. He got a chair from one of the tables, stood on it, and started waving his hands and yelling to get everyone in the corner to listen. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "now that the evening's entertainment is over and we have withdrawn to the smoking room, let me introduce myself. My name is Crank, and I am a Vlad hater. Next." There was a low giggle in the group. They started introducing themselves similarly. "I'm Boot, and I'm going to stomp on Vlad. I'm Barbie, and I'm going to put Vlad in my world. I'm Hitler, and I'm going to exterminate Vlad." Crank said, "Hey, poor taste. Don't you know this is a family program?" There was more laughter. Other parts of the warehouse saw what was going on, and they came to join in. Each person got to stand on a chair next to Crank and introduce him or herself. Some of them really had the crowd laughing. They didn't have a plan, but they had camaraderie, and already Crank was the leader. Vlad's guards started to filter in, and they did not look pleased with the atmosphere. They interrupted with bullhorns to say that there would be food, and people came in the back with more tables. The introductions continued, however, and Crank saw a couple of the guards smiling a little too. Slowly, people went to the lines to eat. The guards announced again with bullhorns that Vlad would speak to them soon. A lady, her arm in a sling, said, "You don't need a bullhorn, jackass. I'm right here." The guard kicked her, but then backed up as several people made a move toward him. Another group of guards opened the door at the same time and pushed an open corridor through the crowd. They set up rope lines that led to a raised platform which would evidently act as a stage. A microphone descended from the ceiling into the stage area. The guards herded everyone to the lines. Music preceded Vlad's arrival. It was mostly village people, but some Twisted Sister and ZZ Top was mixed in. Over time, members of Vlad's group came in and stood behind everyone who had been through the day's ordeal. They were thin, wore brownish clothes, and there was a look of desperation and cruelty together in their eyes. Crank thought they must be slaves. The Imperial March played, and Vlad strode into the hall. He wore a black and purple robe, a fur hat with a golden star, and carried a staff. His slave supporters started to cheer, and they poked and prodded everyone from behind to get them cheering too. That worked somewhat. Vlad climbed the stairs to the stage, where he was given the microphone. His guards screamed for silence. "Let me congratulate you. You have shown yourselves both decisive and vicious. You will be rewarded. You will be fine soldiers in my army as we take this city, this state, this country. Under my rule, we will unify." Someone laughed. Vlad stopped and searched the crowd. From some anonymous quarter, someone said, "No one talks about unifying the country anymore." "Who said that?" said Vlad. His guards searched the crowd with their eyes. "Reveal yourself," he said. No one answered. "Reveal the one who laughed, or 2 will die." Again, all stood still. 10 will die. Crank raised his hand. He pushed to the front. "I said it. I laughed, and then I said that." The audience knew this was impossible, since the sounds had come from different areas. In actuality, Crank had done neither. He started around to the stairs, and guards seized his arms. "Let him come up," said Vlad. A cheer rose up as Crank was pulled up the stairs. He approached Vlad, with guards on either side. Vlad threw his arm up in the air to silence the crowd. The slaves were quiet, but the rest of the crowd were not. "Silence!" screamed the guards. Crank was standing right in front of Vlad. His guards had to let go of his arms and pointed their guns to the crowd. He saw fear in Vlad's eyes. He had miscalculated. Inviting Crank to the stage had not highlighted his power. Crank's hand suddenly shot forward and grabbed Vlad by the throat. The cheers rose to a deafening pitch. Crank waited to be seized by the guards. He expected clubs or bullets, but nothing happened. Then the slaves started to cheer. People started to rush the stage and climb onto it. Then the guards did attack Crank, smashing him with clubs. But when they saw the wave of people surmounting the stage, they raised their guns again and backed off. One shot into the crowd, which surged forward and stomped on him. The other tried to give up, but was also swamped. The other guards tried to flee with varying levels of success. Vlad struggled free from Crank's hand, but by then the crowd was upon him. They kicked and stamped him. They punched him as he tried to stand, took a club from one of the guards and smashed him in the mouth when he begged for mercy. Crank felt himself being lifted up on their shoulders. "Give me a saw," he said. He writhed a little, so they had to drop him. "A saw!" It took a minute, but someone pressed a saw into his hand. He motioned for everyone to stand back, and a circle formed around the body of Vlad. At the same time, people were going out to retrieve their weapons. There was some gunfire outside the warehouse. Crank knelt down and went to work with the saw. Very soon he stood up, holding Vlad's head aloft. Bonzo came up to him with a long metal pole. Crank shoved Vlad's head onto it. The screams were deafening, and he was surprised at how hard it was to get the head to stay on the end of the pole. They held it up, and the warehouse went into a frenzy. Crank found the microphone. "No more comic book presidents," he yelled. Cheers and peals of laughter filled the room. They shook their fists, and they brought them into unison. He didn't know where it came from. Well, he did, but he could hardly believe he was saying it himself. He said, "USA, USA." The crowd took up the chant too. "USA, USA." "We're home," he said. He said more, but later he didn't know what. He only knew that he spoke, and the people cheered, and somehow he felt a line straightening back back to the first day he had picked up a gun in anger.